Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast presented by Cooper Tires and the week in sports cars. Also, as we've come to tell folks at the grand open of each episode, it's also presented by...
it's me again.
Come on! You know you're supposed to talk.
You're going to say Cooper Tires.
I never said it. What is wrong with you?
Well, man, what can I say? Good evening, everybody, from a confused Goodwin here in the UK, in the dead of night. Yeah, no, it's getting more hilarious, my lack of ability. This week brought to you by one of the seven dwarves. It's Sneezy, because I've got a horrible cold. Soon to be Doc, and certainly not bashful.
You are failing on the timing of taking your sleeping pills, Goodwin, because I've served you up 3 times, and you have dropped the ball twice. You did the first week, which is fine. I didn't tell you that's how I was going to intro, and you knew what was coming and nailed it last week, and man...
terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I failed again, and as my wife would tell you, that's a constant challenge to her as well. Good evening, everybody.
Yes, you've been thrown out of scrutineering, excluded from the event, but nonetheless... My dear pal, Graham Goodwin, even a sniffly, coffee, coldy Graham Goodwin, editor, man in charge of dailysportscar.com. He is the wacky fella from the UK who covers, by and large, the FIA World Endurance Championship, European Le Mans Series, Asian Le Mans Series, and lots of good things. On the other side of the pond, I'm Marshall Pruett. I cover lots of things North American, IMSA, also a little bit of Pirelli World Challenge, which I think I've come up with a new name for it, because its official name is now...
Series United States of America,
GT America, of. So I'm just going to call it the Blank Stare World Challenge GT presented by Pirelli Pain or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. Nonetheless, we're already off the rails yet again. One of the things we specialize in, and in our weekly look at sporty car racing around the world, driven by and large from the questions sent in by you on Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. Graham has gone through and done a fine job of collating all of those questions, and so here we have about 7 pages of them broken into series and subjects, and I figure now might be a great time to get into the first one. Mr. Goodwin, you did a mighty fine job of spreading the word and getting really, really great stuff out about the first constructor to commit to the ACO FIA's future prototype category, HyperCar, which we're tentatively calling it, Car, which we have dubbed it ourselves. Fine interview with Jim Glickenhaus, and we have got lots and lots of questions. Just going to read off. We've got Joe A. Campora, Dennis Prohoniak, Matthew Hawkins, Patrick Thomas, Preston _PLB, Travis Bender, Mark Whitledge, James Counter, Kyle Brown, Cookie Monster FL, Adam Farrell, Garen Batten, Jordan Hopwood, and Dennis Prohoniak again, all who've sent in /hypercar questions. I know many run along the same theme, but there's lots to pick through. As our resident hypercar car expert, man, he of breaking exclusive scoop news, why don't you walk us through this to open the show?
Well, I mean, first things first, it was excellent to catch up with Jim Glickenhaus. Spoke to him back in August. We talked about the prospects of these new rule sets, but it's very clear he's taken a look at exactly what is available to prospective manufacturers. He's seen those draft regulations, and he, with his partners, has committed. And you're quite right, MP is the first to actually publicly commit. I think we can reasonably add Toyota into that total, because they've made it very clear that they've been in that room and are in it for the long run as well. But I think it's particularly good news to see a small boutique manufacturer of any description stepping up. The fact that it is Jim Glickenhaus, with his recent record of investing pretty heavily and very heavily in terms of the available finance to his small company in motorsport as the engine, no pun intended, to drive forward awareness of what they're trying to do with road car products, I think is absolutely blinding news. So just to kind of, the highlights are committing to a full 2020-2021 WEC program with 2 cars, Chevy prime moving power, the car designed to be called, I think, the SCG 007. There will be road capable versions of that car, and he does intend that if at all possible, at least one of the cars that enters Le Mans will leave Le Mans on the road, and he intends to take that car for dinner in Paris. Let's hope that's part of the romance, if you like, that the Glickenhaus ideal kind of comes with. But there's a lot of really practical stuff behind this. This is, an organisation that really has built cars in tiny numbers to this point, now investing in a new production facility in Danbury to the likes of you and I and others that have been following the sports car train for some little time. That will be a place in Connecticut which is familiar. That's because it's part of what used to be the Highcroft Racing facility.
And also the Farnbacher Lowell's money laundering ALMS Greek church operation run by the currently imprisoned Greg Lowell's.
There you go. So he's not going to be turning up anytime soon. But that's going to be the road car facility. The race cars, the LMP1, HyperCar, car vehicles will be built at their Turin outfit, which has been the place the current and previous race cars have been built. To follow, we've got a new replacement for the SCG 003 called the 004, and that will, he hopes, spawn a GT3 version, which we will initially see probably in 2020 again, with a race program centered around the Nürburgring. But following on from that, his stated intention is to produce those cars in sufficient numbers that he will go for full GT3 homologation. And he was talking, no prompting, about IMSA and GTD. Fine-looking car, the 004. Beyond that, there's other cars to come, including a modern version of the Baja Boots and some rather more retro-style cars that might beget a GT4 outfit. If you're stateside and if you want to go and see what the current Glickenhaus looks like, you can do that, because the current SCG 003 HPD engine car, broadly speaking to GT3 specification, the car that actually set pole position last year at the Nürburgring 24 Hours, will be racing stateside at COTA for the COTA 24 Hours. And that, so if you are around in the Austin area in the near future, then you can go and shake him by the hand and be assured. Approach him politely, and Jim will give you the time. He will give you the time, and will be happy to talk about all things Glickenhaus, because that MP, exactly the kind of guy he is.
Graham, do you have a feel? You mentioned a General Motors related power plant, as to whether that would be of the naturally aspirated variety, of a turbo variety, if and what lineage it might have. I know that with the first SCG 4A, they were using a Honda twin turbo V6 as the base power plant, and really worked through that to try and make it something that was functioning and successful and such. But curious if he's given you any inkling as to what direction they're headed with the 007.
Well, remember, the whole rule set is predicated on this roughly 720 brake horsepower power. There are going to be fuel flow restrictions for this, etc. My guess would be it's going to be something large. It's going to have 8 cylinders, but I would be not remotely surprised if there wasn't some kind of turbocharging or supercharging implied to that engine to get that power reliably and more particularly efficiently. So, knowing Jim as I do reasonably well in this kind of regard, I think you're going to find that whatever he produces will be something that has a sense of occasion about it. And at Le Mans, the sense of occasion is not just about the way it looks, it's about the way it sounds as well. I don't think enthusiasts are going to be disappointed if and when this thing hits the track.
Well, what other areas from the 10 plus questions we received on Car do you think you should delve into a little bit deeper before we spin off to something else?
Well, you name-checked a number of our listeners, and let's just run through some of the questions that have come up with. Who would we expect now with Glickenhaus committed to the 2021 regs, says Matthew Hawkins. Patrick Thomas also says he saw a racer. What smaller teams will step up? I think it does. The fact that somebody has stepped up and shown that there's a possibility here might well just catch the imagination of one or two of the other more hypercar-based organisations. We have seen interest from Koenigsegg, although they appeared initially to be rather more interested in something that was road car based. We've also heard from David Brabham and the emerging Brabham hypercar program that they might be interested. Again, I think that was more about a direct racing version of what they were presenting. But let's wait and see what comes out from this. Other questions here around Aston Martin and the Valkyrie. It won't be a Valkyrie, but it will be something, I think, if Aston Martin do commit. And I happen to think they are probably the next most likely to commit, that will be based on the third iteration of the Valkyrie program, the so-called 003, not the Valkyrie Pro, but the third car. And it would be effectively, oddly enough, for a question that will come up later, MP, a silhouette version of that. So effectively what it will be is a pure racing chassis built to dimensions of a kind of silhouette sort of Group 5 version of a current hypercar. So it might well look like one of those cars. Underneath, though, it will be very, very different. The key to it, though, and it's where some of our other listeners are going, is this is about brand awareness. It's about the marketing punch you could get behind this. And again, a couple of questioners asking if is this some kind of abandonment of the R&D side that attracted Toyota in the first place. I'll go back to what Pascal Vasselon from Toyota's technical director told me at Fuji here, which was this is effectively something we've got to accept for right now. There is a recovery process here underway. But if this is what it takes to get the manufacturers back interested in a global program based around the Le Mans 24 Hours into endurance racing, I think, number one, that is a price worth paying. Number two, we'll soon see whether or not this has actually got that global appeal that they wanted to have. And it might well prove to be a very handy bridge between the here and now, which is not a very nice place to be for anybody interested in LMP1 and sustainability, and the middle part of the next decade, when we should start to see the first fruits of what we know numerous manufacturers are actually working on developing, and what we know certainly is the next major rule set, which is the zero emissions side. And there we do start to get into exciting territory with already stories from us, from you, from other people that more than suggest that the likes of BMW, Audi, and for that matter Toyota are actively working now on developing that technology to the point where it's raceable over the kind of distances that make it interesting to the likes of me and you.
Oh, I'm going to throw this in because it absolutely doesn't fit, but I just noticed it, and you realize that my brain has the capabilities of a fly, so let me just mention it while it is stuck in my brain before it falls out. Thanks again to everybody who has continued to join in and help spread the word about our still relatively new Week in Sports Cars podcast. Looking, Graham, at our statistics. We'll talk about stats a little bit later in the show, but looking at our stats, for example, the 10 most downloaded episodes over the last 3 months, my Week in IndyCar show has more than a year head start over the Week in Sports Cars, meaning it's had a lot longer to build a bigger and wider following, yet looking at, say, the 10 most downloaded episodes over the last 3 months, we have 1, 2, 3, 4
Wow.
Week in Sports Car episodes. So, yeah, I mean, admittedly, Week in IndyCar is still up front, and they're fairly solid, but I'll just maybe encourage, hey, I wouldn't be upset if the Week in Sports Cars overtook the Week in IndyCars as the most popular product here on our little podcast. So, anyways, just wanted to mention that. I don't mention stats a whole bunch because we don't want to put people to sleep, but I love the fact that what we're doing here, my friend, by the numbers, is continuing to gain traction.
Well, I think let's put it this way. I want to say thank you, and I'll say thank you not just for you to giving the time to do this, because I thoroughly enjoy doing it, but also, it's very clear as I curate these questions every week that there are more people coming to us with more and more interesting questions, not just some of our regulars, and you are delighted you keep coming back and keep challenging us with excellent questions, but also new faces, new names coming forward. And you know what? There is no question too basic. There is no question that is deemed stupid. We're the stupid ones. We're the ones that will give the time up and actually answer. You don't understand? If you're confused by this wacky world of endurance racing, just ask us the question. It is a very accommodating family. And when you get away from the sometimes, how can we put this, combative arena that is social media and get into what is absolutely a rapidly growing community here, you'll find this a friendly place to come to just learn a little, to expand the kind of reach a little, learn maybe a little about some of the series that you're not directly interested in, and find things that might be of direct interest on that front. Anything and everything, as long as it goes round and round for more than an hour, I'll always answer the question. It is my passion. It's why I do what I do for a living. It's why I don't do what I used to do for a living. And, I seldom get into a conversation that, frankly, I don't enjoy at one level.
From pole dancing to sports car reporter, the Graham Goodwin story. That is truly, truly a remarkable thing. Well, let's cover off a few more car bits here, mate, and then we can wander elsewhere in the sports car world.
Well, it's a quick one from James Counter. Do you think that the ACO should mandate that Glickenhaus has to run the yellow, black and white shark livery? He's so excited about the programme. I think he's going to bring something that I think it's going to be a head turner. He's a very proud American, very proud that the cars that he's going to be building for the road are going to be built in the USA. I think, we've seen the kind of heritage look, the white with the blue stripe on the renders for the car. I think you're going to see something very, very special indeed, James. And frankly, reach out to Jim on social media and ask him what it would look like in that livery. And I bet you right now, within 24 hours, you'll see exactly that posted back. I've never known anybody at the level at which Jim operates with that organisation that is as open as he always has been, even from the days when he was tweaking the tail of Ferrari by building a car they didn't want to build for the road, to now making global headlines. Yes, we've got to see the reality emerge, but he's made it very clear what the plan is, and I think you're going to see some more details of that in the coming days.
Let's see, I'm just wandering down the list here. Adam Farrell. It's funny. I find, Graham, that there's such defined camps between those who love the big honking fin on the back of prototypes, of which I think that might be a smaller percentage, and those who dislike the big honking fin. I think our man Andy Blackmore coined that term, by the way, so trademark Andy Blackmore design.
Absolutely.
Adam Farrell says, we don't know the car technical regulations yet, but are we expecting a mandatory big honking fin? Clearly this will hinder the manufacturer's individuality and, quote, road car styling intentions, but obviously no compromises can be made on safety.
Okay, I'll answer the question. Number one, I don't care about the big honking fin, never have. It was on the cars for about 5 minutes before I forgot they were there, to be honest with you. For me, I was at the tracks when some of those horrendous lift-off accidents happened, and I know personally a couple of the guys who were pretty badly hurt in them.
Hashtag me personally.
Absolutely, me personally. Anything that stops that from happening or reduces the chance of that happening, in my feeling, is a very good thing. So do I see that changing? No. It is safety critical. We did get to the stage, I think there was one particular year, and we're talking here about the beginning of the decade, we had 4 or 5 happen in pretty short order, affecting the likes of Jamie Campbell-Walter, Dinder Capello, amongst them, where it was, they were nonsense incidents, but they had dramatic effects. So, look, I can't get excited about Adam, to be absolutely honest with you. I mean, to me, it is about still having the freedom to race at 200 plus miles an hour at Le Mans. And if that's the cost of being able to race for 200 miles an hour plus at Le Mans, then that's a reasonable price to pay, I think. Got a couple of other questions, including from Gareth Batten and from Jordan Hopwood, to talk about the road car applications that might come from these hypercar things. Number one, there is no necessity by regulation to have a road car version of these cars, but there is a kind of part of me that sort of hopes we do. That was what was so exciting about it has to be said at that stage, pretty self-destructive rule set of GT1. But I can't believe that if we do get some of these boutique manufacturers involved in this, that we won't see at least some attempt to develop a road car that builds on the collateral that's built up from the racing program. Certainly, as I say, Jim Glickenhaus absolutely is going to do that. I hope he's the start of a little bit of a movement. Wouldn't that be a nice thing?
Well, have we sufficiently covered car? Should we move
I think so for now. I think so. There'll be more to come in the coming weeks, I'm sure.
Well, I've picked the first category. Why don't you pick the second and kick it off?
I think we should go with a little bit of IMSA world, shouldn't we? Because we're at the end of the IMSA season, and there are some bits and pieces around. I know there's some questions here about the Michelin Encore meeting, but we're now getting to the stage where there's going to be less immediate news, I think, although I know that both you and I are working on some quite exciting stuff in the background that we can't tell listeners about yet, but there is some exciting stuff kicking around.
Sorry, we were just the guys who said we're working on stuff we can't talk to you about, but we just spoke about it. So
if you knew what we knew.
If you knew. If you only knew what we do. So a little bit of a callback to our friend Scott Atherton in his American Le Mans Series days, where it seems like we were all wanting to know what he knew on a daily basis. Well, do you want to feed questions to me? Shall I grab some?
I think you should do that. I'm gonna kick off and just challenge you. Ooh. Tom Bacon says, "Will Spirited Daytona be on the grid for the Rolex 24 next year?"
See, notice how I said "feed me" in the first questions from Tom Bacon. From what I understand, Tom, I have heard some words that there are drivers certainly speaking with Troy Fliss and his Spirit of Daytona racing effort out of Florida to be on the grid for Daytona. I can't say whether it would be more than that. Some of the rumors that I heard over the summer while they were on hiatus due to a grand lack of budget involved coming back in 2019 to do a limited North American Endurance Cup effort. So the 4 long races. Haven't gotten any updates. Troy is in a class of team owners, not just IMSA, but racing in general. I have a couple of classes of team owners, and he falls into the one of, if you would like to actually speak with the person, it will take a commitment to at least a week, maybe 2, possibly 4, and up to a dozen phone calls to get him to return your phone call. And so I guess I need to commit myself to this regimen, Graham, of getting on the, let's see how many calls it takes to get Troy on the phone to answer basic questions. And what's funny is when he does answer, the guy's fantastic and usually very free. And I mean, so it's not, he's a bad guy. Not at all. Just there are a few. In IndyCar, Ed Carpenter is the same way. He and I actually laugh about it, where so often I'll just ring his general manager or other folks to get answers that I'd really like to pose to Ed, but he and the telephone, not always the best friends. And I hear that from others in the industry too. So normally I'd say, it's just you, Pruett. He doesn't like you. Anyways, in the case of Troy and SDR, I hear that they are moving towards something. I don't know if that will come to fruition, but it is purely and 100% financially driven compared to desire driven. Tom, other quick note I'll throw in here, and 2018 really bore evidence of this, is IMSA founder Jim France, who also owns the championship-winning Action Express team, was very much a friendly supporter of Spirit of Daytona for many, many years. And I don't just mean moral support, I mean being able to help out financially as well. And I would say that there had been rumors for a while that this relationship had changed. Not necessarily that there was a falling out or anything like that, Graham. Just, hey, I'm maybe not going to be that guy anymore. And I would say with their Cadillac DPI VR falling out for more than half of the season and not even coming back for the season finale, I would say there's definite proof that funding of that program is solely on the team owner these days.
I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Jerry Robert Sudduth.
Hey, Jerry.
Sudduth. It's Jerry. Hi, Jerry. Taking his wife to her first IMSA race next May at Mid-Ohio. She's been to and loves IndyCar races, but seems skeptical about sports cars. What with guys like us there? What do you guys recommend to give her a rewarding experience for her first sports car race? Right. Okay.
How's this, Jerry? And I met Jerry at the Mid-Ohio IndyCar race last year. The IndyCar stuff, I think, could be described as cool and a little bit, not aloof necessarily, but a little bit hands-off in terms of fan engagement. Obviously, you know, they've got the autograph sessions. You can get into the paddock and see some of the cars, but drivers aren't always present. A lot of them hide in their transporters or motorhomes. Crews, since Mid-Ohio tends to be pretty closed in, since a lot of teams have to work out of these ancient wooden garages, it's a little bit cramped. Therefore, it makes it a little bit harder to get up close and see the cars. Realizing that IMSA teams, Jerry, are really forced into that same situation where many are stuffed in there, I would say the big difference is you are more likely, with your wife, and to tell her up front, you are more likely to have those IMSA teams compared to the IndyCar teams say, yeah, come on in. Come behind the barrier. Take a look around. They're used to that. It's part of sports car culture in many series. Definitely in IMSA. Not so much IndyCar. So there's a little bit of the velvet rope approach with IndyCar at Mid-Ohio that you will not find in most cases when IMSA visits there. So I would probably just pitch things that way. You're going to get access. You're going to get to meet a lot more people. And also, don't be afraid. You might even start a running count of how many cars. Teams might let her sit in, take a photo of her inside, a prototype, a GT car, whatever. And also driver access, too. IMSA drivers know that really this sport is built on fans and engaging directly. So I would probably present things in that way. You're going to get more access to more people and see more of the inside than you would during the weekend.
And get on the grid. Get on the grid. That's, again, something which not unique, but it is special. And I think the powers that be in a number of series have realised the appeal to fans to get that close up at a point where there's drama, there's electricity in the air, and it is something bit special. I think you're absolutely right. Bang on there, son.
I got something right this week. Yay! I'm not an idiot. All right, where should we go next? Son of Ares. Let's go with Son of Ares 800. That sounds like a really foreboding computer program from the 1980s. With rumors of NASCAR and IndyCar interest in the Surfers Paradise Street Course on the Gold Coast arising, could you see IMSA making a one-off or even a regular event on the same circuit or another track in Australia? I would say absolutely not. And that's not a negative pointed at IMSA. If you think about the past history of IndyCar racing on the Gold Coast for 10, 15 years, there's already a precedent there. NASCAR as well is something that, like IndyCar, it's a regional delight. Those things are truly American. And I realize that there's some NASCAR Europe and versions of it, but the real hardcore NASCAR stuff, there's only one place where this exact model that you see racing for the Cup right now is taking place. So I'd just say here we have two series that are not found anywhere else in the world, and so importing them, spending the money to import them, sounds like a very good tourism call. With IMSA, knowing that some of the cars, or cars very similar to it, live in the region, right? We have the Aussie GT Series, GT3 cars are very prevalent, obviously, Asian Le Mans Series and such, entrants in and around the general Down Under area, LMP2 cars, LMP3. Just say that, yeah, DPI is uniquely American when it comes to sports cars, but it's a version of LMP2. So it would take a lot of money to get IMSA to bring its entire roadshow there. And knowing that, Graham, the folks in the very good Gold Coast, if they wanted to have an endurance race, could say, hey, a lot of those things that make up IMSA's grid are kind of here or hereabouts that we could pull together. I would not think they'd reach to America for that solution.
Worth saying as well that there are massive levels of appeal to the IMSA package, but one of the challenges is that because of the length of time the cars spend on track through the season, and for that matter, the logistics of North America, it is, in terms of the running costs involved, relatively expensive for a continental series. And adding that flyaway in that way, it would have to be very carefully managed in terms of where it would sit in the calendar. And my gosh, it would have to be at nil cost of those teams because it is a major struggle to put up the kind of the millions and millions of dollars that it takes to put one or two cars on the grid anywhere. All
right, my man, why don't you send a few more my way?
Let's bowl you a couple about the Michelin Encore. Jason Hyde asking whether or not there would be more than 20 cars at the Michelin Encore. He says the entry looks a little light. Any speculation on teams with TCR cars to come to join the IMSA Michelin Pilots Challenge Series for 2019? And also, right, so another, hello fella, how many entrants do we expect for the Encore and why not more?
So we did have the entry list come out. There's also a little bit of a proviso with that, Graham, that this is the entry list we have now, and with the event almost here, IMSA obviously wanted to get that news out and reserve the possibility there could be more. I will admit, Jason and Right Turn Lover, I thought we'd be looking at 30 to 35, so almost 50% fewer, 40% fewer, I should say, whatever percent fewer, as I'm struggling at math here. A lot less than I thought, but at the same time, we're also in the proverbial dead of winter, Graham, where a lot of teams said, hey, we budgeted for, name it, whether it is IMSA World Challenge, the former Continental Tire Series, where a lot of the cars, LMP3 class as well series, we've budgeted for that for the season, and, that's what we did. And throwing in a race here in the middle of winter that we hadn't budgeted for, I can see why they're, based on the entry list, we can see that some teams have just basically said, we're good, we're working, we're rebuilding a car, we're doing whatever we're doing, but ramping back up for a race in the middle of November, maybe not the thing that as many folks have chosen to do. Other thing to this, real quickly, just to close, is as they presented from the outset, this was never meant to be just a pure race for the sake of racing. It was also meant to be a bit of a social gathering. Hey, come and feel out IMSA, what it's doing. If you want to be a part of it, bring your cars that you might be using, I would say specifically in the Blank Stare World GT presented by Pirelli Payne, in GT3, GT4, TCR-ish, that area. Come on over, try us out, see if you like us. And there has been some of that, not as much as I thought, but just because some teams have not chosen to do the Michelin Encore race at Sebring here, doesn't mean that they won't show up come 2019 to race. Definitely expecting, Jason, to see more TCR cars announced for the rebranded Conti Series, the Michelin Pilot Challenge Series. I know of one that was looking to do a release this week because they came back and said, please hold the embargoed story you wrote. So I would expect we're going to learn about a couple more cars coming into TCR in IMSA for the first time, and I think that we're going to hear about more, Graham, before we get to the season openers in January at Daytona.
Well, it segues nice to actually a group of 3 questions. Another one from Right Turn Lover, Brian Dawkins, and Inuit. Inuit, not spelt as if it's an Eskimo, but Inuit. Someone might have tried to ask a question last week. With GTD moving to Michelin's, will the class have to be slowed down to not get too close to a GTLM pace? Asked Right Turn Lover. Similar question from Brian. With Michelin coming as a supplier of spec tyres next season, will IMSA dictate the performance parameters of the tyres as they did with Conti, or will Michelin be allowed to bring their best? And then the question from Inuit, a bit of a random question, he says, thought of it after the tyre discussion last week. One of the things he appreciated about the Continentals, a clear visual indicator on the tyre when the car had wets on. Will there be something similar to differentiate the Michelin wets?
So we have a great question to open with here. Continentals only improved year after year in IMSA, and I think got to a point where they went from being something drivers privately hated to openly praised. We have seen, competition-wise though, that Michelin has been pretty darn good at being the fastest and best in the majority of classes that they participate in sports car racing. Not all. Obviously, Dunlop has also been extremely good in some areas too, but I would say that there will need to be a definite effort put in place by IMSA to make sure that the gap between GTD and GT Le Mans does remain satisfactory. Because with the GTLM cars having been on Michelin's from the outset, all barring the privateer-ish Falcon tire entry that we had for a little while, we've been solely, I shouldn't say exclusively, it's the class GTLM is still is open, or has been open, but we have not seen anyone else come in, so we've had only Michelin's in place on the factory, BMWs, Corvettes, Ferraris, Fords, and Porsches. So the real new thing here, as you mentioned, is going to be GTD coming on to Michelin's. And in that case, I would say it'd be hard, I believe, for the GTLM cars to all of a sudden get drastically faster with their Michelin. So, yeah, I think there's going to need to be some work, for sure, to maintain that gap, so we don't have GT3 cars now effectively beating up on GTLM cars because they tend to either have a whether it's the power or some of the driving aids, Graham, that can certainly complicate things once we get into the corners. Beyond that, I would say if we're looking at what we're going to have for sidewalls, maybe calling out rain tires, I honestly don't have an answer to that. I mean, the one clear visual indicator I've always used is
it raining?
Looking up in the air, or seeing if the track is wet, which tends to be a pretty good visual indicator as well as to whether teams are on wets. Not always the case. There's obviously someone says, hey, we're going to pit early and go back to slicks or otherwise. Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that, but there's also maybe a bit of a practical answer to that as well. Let's see. Shall we go?
While you have a quick look through that, a couple of other bits and bobs to do with Michelin. One was, I was interested to see that we had 2 teams testing Michelin tyres at Portimao after the ELMS season closed, because my understanding is the last available choice that they were able to offer to LMP2 teams, the ELMS, was fielded at Portimao. So it does beg the question, what were they testing? Were tyres for IMSA perhaps being tried out at what is notoriously tricky track for tyre degradation in Europe ahead of that? The other quick thing, because I know it's not covered by questions because it came a little bit late, is to say that we've also had this interesting thing overnight, your time, MP, with an additional test session being added for LMP1 in the WEC next week at Shanghai for apparently development tyres for LMP1. Whether or not that's to cover off the rather odd seasonal logistics, which means not a lot of out-of-season testing, or whether or not that is Michelin stepping up to try to put in some kind of assist for the issues to do with EOT and the performance disparity, remains to be seen. But just a couple of 10 penneths or 10-cent pieces from me on the Michelin front.
Yeah, we don't get a whole lot of information on what they are looking to test while at their tests. We'll sometimes get information as to who was testing, and we'll maybe even get a little bit of info. Oh, we're trying rains, we're trying this, we might be trying a new compound, but we don't often get, this is everything we're doing, this is who we're doing it for, etc., etc. So, unfortunately, at least on this end, we're not able to provide deeper insights as to what may have been going on at the aforementioned test. I'm going to grab one here from our man Andrew Baca, good old Baxter. What does the presence of Core Autosport do to the IMSA P2 class? The class is meant to give non-professionals an opportunity to compete against themselves. However, they now know they need to compete against a team which toppled Wayne Taylor Racing, Extreme Speed Motorsports, Mazda Team Yost, and Team Penske, Acura Team Penske last year in DPI. Does this attract teams who want that high level of competition or drive them away? Does this increase the cost of competing of a competitive budget now that success means matching the talents of Colin and Jeff Brown? Awesome question, Monsieur Baxter. This honestly is what it's supposed to be, though. This P2, this dynamic of a true AM and a true pro. Obviously, we get into the endurance races, we add additional drivers, but for the real heart of what this program is meant to be in the split new for 2019 P2 class, it's meant to be a Colin Brown and John Bennett type arrangement. And it reminds me, if I look back to my days in the IMSA GTP category, of this is really what it was. You had customer-ish cars, a Porsche 962 or Spice, whatever, and you had a rocket in the car, and there was often the team owner in the car. It wasn't a requirement for that, Graham, and there were certainly full pro efforts too among the drivers in GTP. But we did have, in many cases, Bayside Racing team owner Bruce Levin, who was a fine amateur driver, team owner, but he would have Jochen Mass in the car, or Klaus Ludwig, or Bobby Rahal, just supreme pros. And Bruce, like a John Bennett, was uncovered a bit in an outright fight, but these are folks who wanted to go and see how they could do. They loved racing, sporting endeavor. Off you go. I would just say, and so while that might all be obvious, I would just say that I believe anyone looking to LMP2 next year would need to understand and embrace that fact. Hey, Core Autosport is the Team Penske of P2. And they beat Team Penske in DPI last year, among all the others that Andrew mentioned. But what we have here, like an old Bayside Racing, or a Bob Aiken, or a Dyson, or so many others throughout the history of the sport, we have a dynamic where there's always going to be a bar. There's always going to be some team that is the class standard. And if anyone's complaining that they have to go up against Core, that almost knocked off the entire DPI field, well, me personally, hashtag, I don't want to hear those complaints, because it is not the true sporting spirit. I'll throw in one other quick thing here. I did speak with Core Managing Director, COO, I forget all of his titles, Morgan Brady last week, just before they sent out the release saying they were staying in P2. And at least when he and I spoke, he said, yeah, privately we're going to stick with P2, but we really were and did look hard at DPI, and they weren't able to find a manufacturer, I guess, that they felt was going to put them in a truly similar situation. I think Cadillac could have been an option, but I know that, again, just informally, there was a belief of, do we want to be the 8th Cadillac team at this point? Or the 8th Cadillac entry at this point? I don't know if that really stood out to them as a great direction to head, Graham. But I would say that of the other things that we spoke of, we know John Bennett will be driving for that team next year. We are very confident that Jeff Brown will be engineering that car. I also know that I think Colin Brown will be in that car full-time, but I am not prepared to say that is a 100% guarantee, knowing that Colin is also working very hard, and this is maybe a little bit of weekend IndyCar stuff. Colin's working very hard to be the third driver at Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing in IndyCar. And that, whether that's a one-off, say at the Indy 500, knowing that he has extensive oval experience from NASCAR, or a multi-race deal that has him on road and street courses, I would say there's a little bit of to be determined / fill the space when it comes to Colin's plans for 2019. And the cool thing, Graham, is that Core, both John Bennett and Morgan, are fully supportive. They want him in their car, but if he has an opportunity to achieve some or all of his dreams in IndyCar, they are not wanting to be the guys who say, nope, got a contract here, you're ours, give it up. So I would say there's still a little bit of wait and see as to what Colin will or will not be doing. Could that open the door to, who knows, someone else possibly stepping in for part-time or whatever time if Colin does land a big sponsor?
And let's not forget either, by the way, that we've had Colin in Europe, and it's been fairly quiet.
Yeah.
Program for Colin, but Colin has done, of all things, the almost full season of the Michelin Le Mans Cup with United Autosports. Do not count out that Colin might well be looking at multiple programs for 2019. Hope he gets it. He's a very hard-working lad, and hope he gets it. But I am aware of a couple of things in the background that might be being pitched to him, or the other way around. Let's wait and see what emerges in the new year. But you're quite right. We shouldn't be kind of inking those names in quite yet against the 54, should we?
We should not. Where should we go next in IMSA world?
Let's have a quick look here. This one for Joseph Kang. With the new sprint title within the series in GTD, is this IMSA's attempt to attract unhappy, well, it says PwC teams, not PwC anymore, but we get the point, Joseph.
It's Blank Stare World Challenge GT by Pirelli Payne? Or we're still developing the title. We need to come up with something official here, by the way. Joseph, I would say you're spot on. Not 100% aimed at World Challenge teams, but I would say that both series have done this exact thing. We have had the Sprint X added into World Challenge to try and give a endurance-ish, it started out as, an hour or so, driver change and whatnot, really tried to come up with a low necessity GTD style format, and it's clearly taken off and worked for our folks at World Challenge, so good on them. But that was 1,000% trying to fill in something they couldn't offer and didn't offer up to that point that IMSA had that was unique among the cars that were common between both series in an effort to prevent and or retain its customers and to keep their eyes from wandering in endurance format and driver change and all that dual driver format. And yes, I would say anybody who believes that IMSA came up with this new sprint format in GTD, believing that it was just done for fun, well, you're telling yourself funny things, because this is the same idea, wanting to make sure that not only GTD entrants don't go over and play in World Challenge in their sprint format, but also hopefully giving refuge to those who maybe like the idea of playing sprint in IMSA more than they do this new SRO-owned American series, once known as SCCA World Challenge. So, yep, 100%, brother.
One more for you before we get into the midterm and the French wave we're expecting in the second half of the show. Joe Izzo, another regular. Guys, I did it, he said. I pulled off the heist of the year. It's a confession. And I've acquired a rig full of TRD NASCAR engines. Toyota was so impressed they gave him the blessing to use them in a DPI Supra. Ooh. Legal with an IMSA BOP, or get that thing out, lefty motor, out of here.
I would say you're in a great place. We have one kind of blaring V8 in DPI with the Cadillac 5.5 liter motor, but I tell you, if we're talking Toyota TRD NASCAR Cup engines, those things are loud. So yes, absolutely. Let's get that into IMSA. Great that we're breaking news here, Graham. Hashtag breaking exclusive scoop on the Weekend Sports Cars podcast that Joe Izzo, our listener, has been given the green light to enter a Toyota Supra DPI.
Fantastic.
NASCAR
Who knew?
TRD V8 engines. So this technical committee, the Pruett and Goodwin BOP referendum here, we definitely say, yeah, it's in. We'll get back to you on restrictor sizes, RPM limits. If you want to sneak in a turbo or two, supercharger, hydrogen powered, hey, I hear that's a thing. Whatever it is, pack it in, and we'll BOP the sucker. We're going to apply with this new Pruett Goodwin BOP business that we have. We're going to use the GT3 model, right? But we're not really going to tell IMSA. But we're going to use the GT3 model. Do whatever you want. We'll just sign off on it. It'll be all good. But then we'll dummy up some fake-looking homologation papers that say, oh, yeah, it's all signed off. Everything's good. You'll be on the track for Daytona. But don't wait, right? Daytona's not that far away. But congratulations. And, hey, big breaking news here, Graham. We didn't even know till we got the question that there's a DPI Super coming. So good for us.
Is our Toyota. Fantastic stuff. Wonderful. Let's move on a bit. Let's have a quick look into where you want to go. You want to go SRO world, the ACO world?
SRO piggybacks perfectly, and then we'll do some ACO after that.
Well, we got a couple of questions. Alex Eichenmiller and Ruslar. Which rolls off the tongue. Ruslar. Say that again. Ruslar. Has there been any news about the proposed GT2 category? Is it still the answer to a question nobody asked? A few months ago, says Alex, the newly announced SRO GT2 category was all the talk of sports car land. Shortly after Car was announced, seemed to be radio silence on GT2. Do we have any updates, insight, progress for cars, teams, programs, GT2? Right, well, okay. The answer is it has gone very quiet. I think we sort of expected it to go quiet about now. I think if we're going to hear about any prospective cars, it's likely to be the latter part of this year, the earlier part of next year. I don't expect a tidal wave of announcements. I think 2 or 3 might come our way. Porsche, certainly, we know, are looking. Lamborghini, McLaren, we know, are interested in the prospects for this. But neither should you then expect a tidal wave of orders, because I'm not at all sure when we'll actually see these cars emerging in competitive trim. For those that aren't aware what the GT2 thing is, it's a bit of an odd one. SRO have purchased the intellectual property, the trademark for GT2. That is now an SRO product. But rather oddly, it doesn't sit above GT3. It sort of sits with it, maybe a little bit below it, with cars that have rather less aero than a GT3, but rather more power. And the initial idea is that this will go into the gentleman drivers classes in a kind of a rolling program of introducing it into SRO's product, with a couple of series next year and then more the year after. I think what this is a Rattel-esque big toe in the water, without a shadow of a doubt, and they are looking towards what I think they are anticipating as being difficult, choppy financial waters ahead for GT3, certainly in private hands. At the moment, very healthy indeed, of course, but they are fully well aware that the operating costs of those cars are getting extremely pricey. So GT2 is part of their plan. I think it's great that they've got a plan. As for whether and when we'll see cars emerging, I would expect that before we get into real world racing in kind of spring next year, that we'll be hearing about plans for 1, 2, 3 cars on offer for those classes. And I expect there will be takers for those cars. Quite exactly where we'll eventually see them, I think, is something that remains to be seen. I suspect that the rollout plan for GT2 will have to be revised before we start to see those cars in any real kind of numbers. Michael Hogan's got one here. He's never heard it answered anywhere before. Well, there you go. Here's a first. How can a team, for instance, like Flying Lizards, be contracted to run an entry and not be called something completely different? This confuses me. They all wear Flying Lizards clothing, but are running cars that are entered as K-Pax Racing. Why is it not called K-Pax with Flying Lizards or something completely different?
Well,
go for that?
Yeah, that one's quite easy. That is because the gentleman who owns K-Pax, Jim Huey, who is the person also bankrolling things, does not want any confusion as to the fact that it is his team and his effort. So keep in mind that this was also the case with his previous service provider, that being Colorado's 3R Racing, Bob Robb, and we had K-Pax Volvos, we had K-Pax, all kinds of fun stuff, but it was definitely under the K-Pax moniker. Whether there was a 3R sticker on the car or some sort of something that let us know that there was Flying Lizard or 3R or whatever involvement, that I would say has maybe been a little bit of a grace area, but this is honestly his preference. If we think about in IMSA DPI, we have Mazda Team Yost. Yost, big player, big partner. I also think that there's a strong brand in that name that serves Mazda as well, knowing that they've partnered with an internationally renowned person like Reinhold Yost. So that's what they've chosen. Not as if Flying Lizard is not also, incredibly internationally renowned, etc., but just preference-wise, Jim has chosen that K-Pax is going to be the absolute leader in terms of naming and branding.
We see it all the time, don't we? We saw it with the always evolving Nissans in Pirelli World Challenge, which was run by A Motorsports. Who'll be coming back with the Lexus efforts in IMSA. Over in Europe, we've seen it, for instance, Krone Racing, when their LMP2 effort was run by Grease Motorsport, and Grease were not mentioned anywhere close to that effort, but it most certainly was their crew running the cars. So it's often a commercial choice. There might also be a bit of politics around it from time to time. Who's got entries for what and how they got them, but nothing sinister. If you were to ask Darren Law or anybody at Flying Lizards, they're extremely grateful, I'm sure, for the business, because they are, after all, a motorsport business. They have their own defined brand, and it doesn't stop them from entering cars in other events too. So good news for all concerned, actually. Lots of fine people putting fine cars into fine racing. Theodore Paul Krupa says, if SRO were to allow a GT4 and TCR into the 2019 Intercontinental Championship, is there any speculation as to what manufacturers might be interested? I'd hazard, I'm not going to quite be as cruel as saying I'm not that concerned about it. I think the reality is you need to understand here, Theodore, that GT4 and TCR are very firmly customer programs for those manufacturers. I'll be along with Audi at the end of this week at the celebration of their customers' successes through 2018 at Neuburg on Friday, and I'm sure we'll be seeing and hearing an awful lot about the GT4 and TCR customers. In fact, last year's event was the handover event for the first batch of those GT4 Audi R8s, and out they were on a very frosty night. I think 12 of them from memory, looking fantastic. But look, these are two classes where there is certainly a burgeoning customer market, and that customer market is expanding very rapidly indeed. That is very good news for the manufacturers who rely on the customer motorsports pennies coming in to maintain what they do as a more factory-based effort. Increasingly, that's what we're seeing certainly among some of the European manufacturers. They need to show a kind of black column in their balance sheets to ease the passage of some of the more expensive, more factory-blessed programs elsewhere. So I hope they find new and interesting ways to get new and interesting customers into new and interesting racing. For me, Intercontinental Challenge, etc., it's beginning to get a bit of momentum. I hope we don't just get this to the point where it becomes a numbers game. How many cars can you throw on a grid?
Let's move over to ACO World, Graham. We've got about a half hour or so left. A real half hour, not a Pruett half hour, which is 5 hours. We've got about a half hour left. We've got a couple of ACO questions, and then we've got a bunch of fun, either general or fun questions. So why don't we make smart use of our time, jump to ACO World, and I will grab the first one here from Stark Raving. What was the win, quote, win, for IMSA to allow the WEC to race at Sebring, referring to the double sanctioned event next March at the 12 hours, with the traditional 12 hours in Sebring? Stark Raving says, I see zero benefit considering the FIA ACO intend to create a new top chassis rule completely opposite to DPI. Was IMSA hoodwinked when they agreed to share the weekend, quote, hoping DPI would be allowed at Le Mans in the future? I would say there's no linkage here whatsoever. My guess, since we have IMSA under NASCAR, their ownership, NASCAR, which owns IMSA, also bought Sebring and other tracks in the acquisition of the American Le Mans Series, which is now running under the unified IMSA banner. It's a business. I would say that in this case, this is definitely a situation where they have seen an opportunity by adding a large international series to come in to bring money to them. If we think about the major events held at Sebring every year, Graham, it is March's 12 hours, Mobile One 12 hours of Sebring, and ... not a lot else. There are other events.
Absolutely.
There's vintage racing there. There's amateur club racing. I mean, there's a lot of activity on that track. But in terms of things that attract people to head there for big major events, they got one. There's 1 week out of the other 52, out of the other 51, that stands out as the big everybody go to Sebring. Since a show up another date for the WEC wasn't really something I guess they thought would work. If I'm Sebring, if I'm in charge of bringing in revenue, I would say, hey, what can I do to expand this to hopefully bring in more money, whether it's through sanction fees, whether it is through advertisers, whether it associated with the WEC, whether it is corporate hospitality, all the things that I might be able to do to make more money. Yeah, double it up. I think it's going to be a pain, but I would do the same thing, strictly into the guys who are trying to earn more money while they're wanting to be there, and do not believe that there's anything else associated with it beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And anybody out there that thinks this is some kind of freebie for the WEC, think again. They are paying, I believe, a significant amount of money to bring the race to Sebring. They want that North American marketplace to be covered off. They clearly decided that their time with COTA was done. I think they were correct in making that decision. And there are not a lot of other choices. Let's wait and see how this one goes.
And
I hope...
Yeah, and I'll just say I'll also throw in a little bit of recent history that I think might have aligned the mindset of the ACO and FIA. When they came to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Indy 500, I believe it was 2016 or so, and met with Indianapolis Motor Speedway President Doug Bowles on the topic of IMS hosting a WEC round. And just informally afterwards, speaking with Doug Bowles about it, he said, "Yeah, it was. We're happy to have them. It was great to have them. We're so happy they were here. It was also really interesting to sit down because they said, okay, we love the idea. We would love to bring our series. How much are you willing to pay us?" To which Doug said, "Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I sat down." The only thought I had in my mind is, I wonder how much these guys are going to pay to race at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So I believe that Monsieur Fillon and also Monsieur Neveu understand that at least over here, these days, since they don't have Circuit of the Americas and either the state of Texas willing to fork out money for the pleasure of their presence, I believe the heads of the ACO and FIA recently have come to an understanding that if they're going to play in America, they're going to be writing a check compared to receiving a check. So that just would only serve the underlying question here from Stark Raving.
Absolutely. I'm going to run through a couple of others quite quickly. Ryan says, why does WC restrict the car numbers? I think it doesn't mean by the entry numbers. He means the numbers on the side of the cars, with the P1 cars lowest, numbers with the P2s in the middle, GTE and GTM around 60 plus. They can't say it's to allow spectators to better identify the cars, because then putting GTE Pro and AM together makes no sense. Well, in fact, in ELMS, it's LMP3 cars that lower. The answer is, it is broadly speaking that system. It does, though, also accommodate a degree of tradition and and customer request. So, for instance, you may or may not remember that just a few years ago, when the Ford GT program came, they took the number 66, which had traditionally been the number for JMW Motorsports, and were given that number in that kind of process. That you'll also see things like Dempsey Proton Racing or Proton Competition will traditionally ask for their traditional numbers, 77 and 88. The same with Aston Martin. They like their numbers in the 90s nowadays. So there is a degree of customer choice, but the rest of it, actually, Ryan, you're right. You're right in saying you're wrong, if you like. It is to do with differentiation of the classes around. What else have we got? I picked up the wrong list here. Jonathan Wu asks, why is the ACO sanctioned Asia Le Mans series to use GT3 cars in the GT class? Is it simply for cost and car count? Does it have a deeper reason? The answer is Asia Le Mans series has been seen as being very much a development series to bring in this new marketplace. And the point, I think, here is you're far more likely to have existing teams in market with GT3 cars than GTE cars. They have looked at a GTE class. They won't take a GTE class if they've not got enough numbers to sustain it. So, Jonathan, it is about fulfilling that mission, if you like, to develop the class. Henry Erbach, now this is one where you might have a point on this one as well. He's heard that high-level people from Penske were at Le Mans last year. Is there any chance we'll see a Penske team participating in the 24 hours anytime soon? With the captain getting up in age, I'd imagine it's on a list. Where do you guys... there you go. So the answer is we know Penske have looked at it, but Penske, I think I'm right, you know them rather better than I do, MP, look at everything all the time.
I believe before it was called CarCar, when there was rumblings of a DPI style prototype option that could be coming to Le Mans, I believe that Penske was looking very hard at trying to do that with a manufacturer, and knowing that CarCar is in theory kind of in that same vein, I would, although I haven't caught up with Roger about this in a little while, so this is another note I'll need to make on Folks to Ring, I would be very surprised, yes, if Roger and company were not looking to do something there, not claiming that there is anything in motion with their current DPI partner Acura. I'll just say that independent of that, Acura/Honda is known and has definitely made their presence felt at Le Mans, competing in both LMP1 and LMP2, winning in LMP2 as well somewhat recently. So the brand knows the power and value of Le Mans. If we do end up in a place with CarCar where it is truly affordable, would I be massively surprised to hear that some sort of Penske-led visit to participate at Le Mans could be, a thing? No, I wouldn't. But as Roger has clearly stated all along, it has to be funded by a manufacturer, and it has to be at a proper level. Just throw in quickly to that as well, knowing that these CarCar regs are 2020, and that we're almost heading into 2019 here. We could also say that the Mid-Ohio win aside, as a debuting entrant in DPI on behalf of Acura, I think the folks at Penske, Graham, know that they punched below their weight and or below expectation. I don't know if anyone expected them to come in and win the championship on their first season with the ARX-05s, but I would say that knowing the healthy appreciation they have for the task ahead and where they fared in 2018, I'm definitely staring at their world saying, I would believe there would be a healthy understanding as well between those inside Penske and Acura/Honda Performance Development that we need to get DPI right first. We need to get to a place where this program is singing and competitive everywhere before we then possibly maybe try and add an international prototype effort on top of it.
I guess the one thing I could add is this. In the conversations that I've had with those senior figures that have been briefing us where we are with HyperCar, CarCar, I did ask a specific question, which was, of the manufacturers that they're currently talking to, now we know some of those because we know who's been in the room, but we also know there are 3 others we're told that have requested presentations at board level. I did ask whether or not any of those manufacturers were currently present in the DPI stakes, and the answer was that no, they weren't. Now, I don't think that's weasel words about a difference between Acura and HPD and Honda. I just think that Honda are not on that initial list. Whether or not they could be in subsequent years is a different matter. That is supposedly the beauty of the new regulations, is it should make a year 2 or even a year 3 entry a relatively simple technical jump. So that's all I can add to that one. Final one I've got for the moment for just purely ACO World comes from David Faulkner, and he says, with regard to LMP1, why don't they relax the fuel flow limits for the P1 non-hybrids, let them off the chain? Fueling time variance, stint length difference do more to highlight the hybrid efficiency, I would have thought. Further making the rollout of hydrogen fuel cell cars a greater efficiency and performance talking points, especially with the H24 LMP3 car. He says running in ELMS, it's actually going to be Michelin Le Mans Cup next year, David. The answer is I completely and entirely agree with you. For me, it's a very simple thing. I do tend to advise and talk in terms of how can you explain the complex in very simple matters. If the story is that you're using twice the amount of fuel to go the same distance and roughly the same speed, then that makes the efficiency argument rather better. At the moment, we're able to do it with the very complicated EOT process that we are left to try not to have to explain. So all I can say really on that front, David, is I completely agree with you. Let's wait and see what happens in the lead up to Shanghai next week.
All right, I'm going to jump in and grab a couple here in the ACO/IMSA cut-across category you have come up with for us, Mr. Goodwin. And the first few are all general DPI bits. Nick Howers says, what is to stop an IMSA team running a DPI from entering it into LMP1's, quote, privateer class for Le Mans? Probably the fact
rules.
that, some of them are very truly specific. LMP2 cars realize that there, could be some modifications to LMP1 spec, but in terms of just, hey, we're going to bolt such and such engine in the back of my whatever, not really allowed in the rules, and there would have to be some creative work to do that. Let's go to Nick Dovbiniak, who says, with LMP1 unable to be balanced properly without neutering the Toyotas, could we see P1 privateers detune to DPI specs and do Daytona or other IMSA races? Again, if we're talking someone using an Oreca 07 based P1 privateer car, or something that falls within the 4 specific LMP2 models that IMSA allows to be used in DPI, then yes, if there's a true, a Dallara P something that I guess we don't really know of yet, but if, say, there were a Dallara P1 non-hybrid that we've forgotten about, that they could then convert into a Cadillac. Again, bit of a fantasy scenario here, but provided the chassis was exactly the same, then yes, in theory, they could build around it.
I think the answer is that they are not. There are broad similarities, particularly with the Oreca, of course, but there are specific areas of the construction which are different enough to make that a very, very expensive job. And the question is, why would you do it? So in other words, if you're talking about converting it to a DPI, that's one thing. If you're talking about a detuned version of an LMP1 car, I'd ask this question: what's in it for IMSA? What's in it for IMSA for potentially a team coming in at their signature races and taking away the results from their full season entrants? I guess that there's that question in return, isn't there? So I don't see that happening. I see the future for DPI being around how you can expand the customer base for the existing chassis, and whether or not new blood is coming for next year and the years beyond that, rather than I hope we can avoid the kind of slicing the same pie with ever smaller slices. If we get down that road in terms of the world of prototype racing, I think that's a branch line nobody particularly wants to go down.
Chris Ward says, now that DPI is untethered from LMP2, could those cars run in LMP1, or are they restricted by the LMP2-based bodies? Also, any news on a Dallara LMP2 in IMSA, and is the Riley LMP2 dead? Similar things, Chris. We really have a grand difference between LMP2 homologated cars and LMP1, and that homologation point, the crash testing done, it really doesn't make it, you're not really able to just take a P2, bolt stuff on it, and call it a P1, so that would be an issue there. Dallara P2 in IMSA, we've heard about the possibilities in the past. I've not heard of anything happening for 19.
There's a possibility. There's a couple of teams looking at potentially coming and doing one or more of the big money races, but the reality is, I think that's beginning to go away. I think that certainly Racing Team Netherlands have mentioned that they might have a look at it. High Class Racing have mentioned that they might have a look at it. But let's wait and see what emerges in the wintertime here for these teams. Things looking very good indeed on P2 front for the European Le Mans Series next year. But yes, it does give the opportunity for some of those teams to come and play in North America, particularly for Daytona. Whether or not they eventually will put their money down, well, we're going to know quite quickly, aren't we? Because they'll have to do the Raw, and they'll have to be on that entry list. So let's wait and see as to whether or not you do get the chance to see the Dallara circulating in at least one of those races. As for the Riley, I've heard absolutely nothing whatsoever, MP. I don't know about you.
Yeah, that ship has sailed and then sunk. And then back to the Dallara side, I haven't heard of anything happening there on a part-time or even full-time basis. So again, a one-off to me is a one-off, great, but in actually getting to see the Dallara at multiple rounds to get a feel for how it compares, at least in IMSA on Michelin's, against the grand majority of Oreca 07s and possibly some Ligier P217s, I don't think we're going to see that happen.
Alex Adele, yet another take, another take on the DPI LMP2. He says probably a similar answer to why don't the ACO use GT3, but do you think DPI, he says for international, the I, remember, classes could work in ELMS? And HLM series, cheap entry to low-level branding for fledgling Chinese manufacturers. I absolutely understand the I for international, but also have to remember the DP, which is for Daytona prototype. The answer is I can see the appeal. The reality is that there will be a more accessible entry point for fledgling manufacturers with car in 2020, and I think it's unlikely that the ACO will want to muddy those waters anytime particularly soon, Stuart. It's not a bad idea. They certainly have had to factor into their reckoning how they can open the doors again to a fledgling manufacturer. I'd just point out this much. There can be few manufacturers more fledgling than Glickenhaus. The Chinese manufacturers that we're talking about, the potential for stepping up here, are significantly larger companies than Jim's Merry Band out of Sleepy Hollow in New York. And Stuart says here, Stuart Hart, with all the focus on the future prototype classes, are the authorities taking their eyes off GTE and GTLM? He's always believed that GTE can get by with a handful of OEMs so long as customer cars are made available. Are we going to see Aston and BMW supply customer cars? Very interesting question. The answer, I think, is absolutely yes, we are going to see them offered commercially. I can't say a great deal on the BMW front, but I am aware of conversations going on for one program, not next year, but perhaps in the future, with a BMW M8 GTE. I'll say no more about that, other than the fact that my market competitors will now be going to speak to BMW and ask them what I'm talking about, which is hilarious. But so the Aston Martin, that's a really interesting one, because if you've kept up with the conversation we had on the show either this week or last week, and also with the stuff I've written on DSC, you'll know that the Aston Martin, the new Aston Martin, you can convert between GT and GT3 specification reasonably quickly. Something like 5 men, 5 hours, and that effectively that means if you did want to do the big races in GT3 and you wanted to do the big races in GTE, you can do it with one and the same car, albeit with something like a £200,000 conversion kit. But in doing that, you're saving £500,000 between the cost of the two cars together. So are there talks underway about the new Vantage making its way into private hands? Well, look at it this way. If anybody's buying a new Aston Martin Vantage GT3, and they are, the first 3 of those in customer hands will contest the Gulf 12 Hours next month, then any and all of those cars could easily find their way into GTE competition. So the answer is yes to that question.
Are we ready to move on to our final bits of fun as we wind down this week's episode, my friend?
I'm always ready. You know me, apart from when you ask me to introduce the show, I'm always ready.
Yes. And as a stripper turned reporter, your ability to multitask is truly awesome. Let's see. General stuff. We'll be a little picky and choosy here. Here you go. Why don't you take Kevin Perez Frederico, since he has made a point to refile a question we didn't get to in last week's show, and that's a point we should raise as well. If you really want us to answer something and we didn't get it the first time around, sometimes the second, it's even taken 3 attempts before, but keep sending them in. We won't ignore them if we think that we definitely need to get to them. So thanks for sending this in again, Kev.
To give you for instance, we typically don't get to several dozen questions a week. That's the level at which we're getting questions, and we're massively grateful for that. But I do keep some of those ones in mind and when we create for the following week. But please do put them in again. Kevin is asking basically a question around the driver ranking system and whether or not there might be a way around that by looking at drivers from other forms of motorsport. We have seen that kind of thing happening previously with certainly LMP2 teams in Europe looking for emerging talents or indeed forgotten talents in karting. The likes of people like Christian England and Wayne Boyd, whose initial stab at a career had gone away. S&P Racing were also very successful on that front, with a couple of the guys in their earlier years of their programs having done racing even a decade before they were called back in as a bronze or a silver, and then running riot through the field with that kind of thing. But it is an interesting question. I'll say this much. You talked about off-road sport in particular. I can tell you this much. There is the prospect in the background of a very significant name indeed in a form of off-road racing that might very well be looking to see whether or not he or she can put their name on an entry list for the Le Mans 24 Hours in the coming years. That I know very specifically. Let's wait and see if that happens. And if it does happen, I'd be very interested to see where their ranking comes, because we have seen in the past, particularly with Sebastian Loeb coming in and being ultimately competitive in an LMP1 car with the Pescarolo, if you remember, coming straight from a WRC special stage for the test day late and going out there and impressing immediately and ending up on the overall podium of the Le Mans 24 Hours. Hope we get more of it, because for me, when you get to events, Le Mans is one excellent example of that. Of course, the best example, I think, of the year MP is at Daytona, when we get this gathering, this superstar gathering from all sorts of different aspects of the sport. For me, that's what makes those events really special.
And I think we even had somewhat recently in IMSA, drifter Conrad Grunewald joined Townsend Bell and I forget who else in a Ferrari at Petit Le Mans. I know that Conrad had also been doing some, I think, Ferrari Challenge stuff, so he'd been, definitely had some road racing background to draw from, and I think did very, very well in the car. But kind of fitting along Kevin's question here, it was someone whose, I want to say, day job certainly wasn't traditional circuit racing, and yet, and I'm guessing he was a bronze, I don't know how they rated him, but it certainly wasn't as a pro, I believe, but fit in quite well, was quick, etc., etc. So I love it when we get things like that, Kev, but in terms of teams saying, hey, what kind of non-traditional drivers might we fit in that could possibly skirt in some way the driver ranking system, keep in mind that whether it's money or the ability to win, those are the two big things teams are going to look for from a driver. It's fairly rare if you're going to take someone. I mean, maybe Sebastian Loeb is the rare example of a person who spent their life crossed up in rallying, who's able to fit in to a professional, crazy fast prototype and be right there and be highly competitive. But for the most part, those are absolute rarities. So I don't know if this is a way to game the system just because the world doesn't have enough Sebastian Loebs. Let's see. Where shall we go next? Nathaniel Ross, has there been any update on the testing program and possible debut next season of the Corvette CAR? Would say they haven't even confirmed it exists, Nathaniel. We all assume the images we've seen and the sounds we've heard are of real vehicles. But just very briefly, Corvette Racing has always done a great job of keeping their mouths extremely shut. There usually reaches a critical mass where you go, okay, look, we know you're building something. This is certainly the case with the C8R, but they have not acknowledged it. They have not said if and when it will race, blah, blah, blah. So we don't necessarily need to play the game. We know that they haven't built it and tested it and then had spy photographers take images of it without their, extreme pleasure. But we don't know when it's coming. We don't know exactly when and where it's been testing. But we certainly hope we see it soon. But as I've said before, I still want to hear the sound of that C7R V8, and I'm glad I've done a couple of in-car audio sessions with them and ambient. So, we're just praying that sound will keep reverberating in our heads for a long time. Also,
I'm gonna add in one little caveat to that one, by the way, which is something's going on, because I know for a stone cold fact that C7Rs are not being released to customers at the moment.
Très intéressant, monsieur. And then the second part of Nathaniel's question, also sticking in GTLM, what has become of Aston Martin's plan to field a GTLM entry for 2019? What can you tell us, Mr. Goodwin?
Not a lot. It has gone quiet. I know this is the plan revealed to us by David King, Vice President of Aston Martin and in charge of both their skunk works that developed the Vulcan and the Valkyrie, amongst other things, but also looks after the strategic direction of their motorsport programs, and they are looking for a partner organization in North America. There are all sorts of rumors as to who that might eventually be, and there's all sorts of rumors as well as to what that program might look like in the first instance, whether or not they will emerge with a GTD program in the first instance and move on to GTLM in future years. I think there's a wait and see aspect here. This is a significant move from Aston Martin back into the North American marketplace. They are very serious about it. They see the growth potential in that marketplace for GT4, GT3 and GTLM products as being significant. That's a real pat on the back to the IMSA package, as well as Pirelli World Challenge and the opportunities that sit there. But as for news, at the moment, there is very little.
And let's see. Where else shall we go?
Got a couple of Ford questions, haven't we here?
Yeah, but I feel like we've gotten into that a little bit or enough already. Please resubmit those ones that we, if you haven't heard what you've asked. Let's go to Bonnie_Lass47. I'm going to ask this again because I would like to know the names of more women active in motorsports so I can follow their careers. Since nobody that she knows of has said she wants to do this, I will keep names out of it. Pretend a wealthy woman has decided to start her own endurance racing team. With all-female team members. She has asked you for suggestions on who to hire for the team members, such as a principal, head engineer, crew chief, other engineers and mechanics, and others. Without regard for their interest, availability, or affordability, who do you suggest? She did say she already has in mind who she wants for drivers, so she does not need those names for a job. Interesting. I would say, at least from the North American standpoint, Bonnie, you might be a bit challenged here because I can mention some names. Kate Gundlach, for example, is the assistant engineer in Scott Dixon's new championship-winning IndyCar program at Chip Ganassi Racing. We can look to Jessica Mace, who's a mechanic working on the Andretti side in IndyCar. Now having been in sports cars and Indy Lights, just won the Indy Lights Championship with Pato Award. There's Anna Chatton, who's been around for a while. She's a gearbox specialist. There's the assistant engineer, I believe actually data engineer on the same Scott Dixon IndyCar entry as well. We can look to sports cars and find a few examples. We can look to NASCAR and find a few examples. We have an amazing woman, head of Firestone's racing program, specifically, or I guess more specifically on the IndyCar side here in the U.S. There are definitely select names that I can offer. What I would say, though, and I realize this is maybe, I don't know if it is a quote fantasy thing or not, but to do this, to staff a team outside of drivers, but have all women on the team side of running the effort, if we're talking sports car and the 10 plus people needed, we would almost have to deplete just about every sport of the women in those positions. So effectively drain IndyCar, drain NASCAR, et cetera, and in order to do this. And so I don't know if this makes sense or not, the way I think of it, but I would rather have a few women in each sport serving as inspirations and building connections and talking to young girls and young boys through STEM initiatives or otherwise that see them in a variety of paddocks than, say, consolidating all of these top-level women, of which there are not enough to be on a single team competing in one series on one car. So I don't know if that answers the question completely, but that's at least my mindset.
I'll add in this much. We did have a Woman of the Year in the European Le Mans Series this year, Marie-Alice Lahaye, part of the Lahaye family team that's known as Ultimate Racing, that were title contenders in LMP3. They'll be going to LMP2 in the Asia Le Mans Series with Panis Barthez this year. Marie-Alice is the race engineer for that team. There are several other teams with significant presence. As you say, not enough ladies around in the paddock in those kind of places, but the increasing numbers. United Autosports have a couple of people. Jackie Chan-DC Racing, we've seen some talent there. And I think it is coming. Clearly, there have been some standard bearers that have actually helped that process, but more and more need to come along. You are going to be hearing in the coming weeks, I hope, if it all comes to fruition, about another high-profile effort, which I hope will add to that push.
Amen to that. And let's see. Just cruising through here. We are in overtime already, my friends. So let's move to fun stuff to close the show. And excellent. Where shall we start among the dozen plus? We have had almost 80 questions this week, which is
bonkers,
flirting with an all-time high. So again, with this trying to stay in roughly a 90-minute show, sometimes we go over a little bit, and with this many questions, I'm actually amazed we've gotten through so many, and we're not that far over time. But how's this? Let me take this one here actually to start on fun stuff, because actually, a little secret here, Graham and I discussed it before we started recording. Yep. This one coming in from Robert Paoli Jr., condolences again, Robert, for recently losing your father. He said, "What is the prize for having your question answered 2 weeks in a row?" Well, I guess now it's 3, because we've answered a question, or we're about to answer a question 3 weeks in a row. And this actually leads to something else that I hope is kind of fun, or folks might like. As you may know, if you listen to my Week in IndyCar series, we give away a T-shirt each week to the person whose question I liked the most from the previous episode. And so my good friends at TorontoMotorsports.com, they make and sell the Week in IndyCar cartoon T-shirts that my pal Roger Warwick drew. They also have Week in Sports Car T-shirts using that cartoon of Graham's lovely mug and mine as well. And so that's great.
I am gorgeous. Yeah.
You are. Again, the whole pole dancing thing was kind of a bit of an obvious tip there. We've had a little bit of a similar thing come together recently. We're still working on it. Maybe we'll just go with the same method. My pal Lee Diffie, NBCSN commentator on IndyCar, and I'm fairly sure he will also be involved in IMSA as NBC Sports takes that over for 2019. Lee has a pretty awesome side business that he started, racingmugs.com, making coffee mugs. And he reached out and said, hey, maybe on the Weekend Sports Cars, you want to do a fun little giveaway there? And I said, yeah, let's do it. So they have just come up with a new Rodney Sandstorm coffee mug, the alter ego of IMSA champion Mr. Taylor himself, Jordan Taylor. And
no, it's not him, is it?
I believe so. Well, again, rumors. Although I've never seen a photo of Rodney Sandstorm and Bigfoot in the same room together, so who knows? That could be another option. But nonetheless, Robert, you've gotten questions answered 3 weeks in a row. Maybe if you get it 4 weeks in a row next week, maybe you'll be the first winner. So I don't know how long we're going to do it. We'll probably do it for a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. But starting next week, Graham and I will probably kick off the show and tell you whose question we liked the most from this week, and then have you send us a direct message with your address, and we will send off a Rodney Sandstorm coffee mug. Still need to ask Lee if he wants to sport for international shipping or not, so this might be a North American offer. I don't know, but just trying to help a pal, honestly, raise some awareness for a cool business that he has. And there's some other coffee mugs in there, too, that you might enjoy if you visit racingmugs.com. So, all right, there's fun stuff there. Next one from M.W. Clarkson. That's 100% Graham Goodwin.
What event over the course of this year has been the most befitting of the phrase bitter gold? Yes, right, okay. It's a phrase I used to use an awful lot in my commentary. Bitter gall, describing that emotion of just utter dejection and despair. We've not had much this year, I'll be honest with you. Not had much. I have to say, on a personal level, didn't much enjoy the Le Mans 24 Hours Week this year. Just not particularly in a good place for myself in terms of getting into the swing of things for that race. But we've not really had that much. It tends to be, for me, MP, when you've got those frustrating weather delays that a couple of the races at the Nürburgring 24 Hours in the past have been like that. Of course, we've had some dramas at the Fuji WEC race on a couple of occasions too. But actually, it's been a pretty happy year on the racing front. I've thoroughly enjoyed what I've been doing with European Le Mans Series this year. I'm really looking forward to the Asian Le Mans Series to come. We've got, for my money, the bitter gall bit is WEC. It's not to do with the competition on track, it's to do with the fact that we've got such long gaps between the races, and that's been difficult to get into that rhythm. But I'm enjoying my racing at the moment, which is a great place to be. So at the moment, not a lot of bitter gall. Watch this space. Let's wait and see what actually comes out. But thank you very much indeed for that, M.W. Clarkson. It's raised a bit of a smile, so no bitter gall here either. Here you go. This one from Big Racer Boy.
Boy! Yes, that's
sounds a bit like Flavor Flav. Sounds like a little bit of a porn star name, if you know what I might be saying. It's a fun question for you guys.
You're a disgusting human being. Nothing but sex.
I know, mate.
A good one.
It's all the time. What is each of your guys' weirdest or oddball WC, IMSA, WSC car, prototype GT that you know of, have seen racing in all of your years of covering motorsport? Now, we're not allowed to mention the cannibal again here.
No, I was just going to say, there's almost a requirement to find a way to wedge the cannibal into every episode. But yeah, good point. I'll go with something new or different, since the cannibal is my favorite. And this is no disrespect to the beloved and recently departed Don Panos, but when the Abruzzi GT2 model turned up, what was that, at Sebring? What was that, Graham? 2012, maybe? Whatever exact year. My brain is trying to reject the memory, but when that turned up, I remember when they did the group photo of all the cars reversed on the front straight, and just walking through the list, and here's a beautiful.
It was 2010 for 2011.
Wow, that far? Okay. There were all manner of beautiful cars on the grid, and I just remember getting to that thing and stopping and going, what kind of bad joke is somebody playing on us here? And I think we'd seen the formative version of it at Le Mans with an unveiling there. But yeah, just hideous. Just among many vehicles that Don created that were stunning and really, I think, memorable for all the right reasons. That was something that I just looked at and said, come on, man. We can do better than this. And I realize it's the racing version, but you also go, who would want to buy this? Who would want to be seen in this on the street? I mean, there's just some of those basic questions of, for folks with functioning vision, was there ever a test of like, hey, let's go out on the street, show people a picture of the thing and say, if you were given this car for free, would you drive it? I gotta believe most people would say hell no. So yeah, I'd say the Abruzzi. Whoo, the Abruzzi was not a beauty.
No, she most certainly wasn't. Where do we start? There are a number of crimes against visuality that emerged from Warren Mosler's styling studio before we actually got to the eventual, actually very pretty Mosler race car. I'm going to go for something a bit different. It's not because it looked dreadful, because actually, as a road car, it didn't. It's a thing called the Trident Iceni. Okay, now what is the Trident Iceni? You wouldn't have seen it very much. It was often promised, very, very rarely delivered. And on the one occasion, I do remember it turning up at a race meeting. And I should describe, by the way, what we're talking about here is a two-seater GT car. It's something over a decade now since the wraps were taken off this thing. 660 brake horsepower. 1,047 pounds-foot of torque, because it was indeed a diesel. And the one time I remember this thing turning up at a race meeting, it dumped the contents of its fuel tank. I think it was Silverstone, if I remember rightly, pretty comprehensively. And of course, diesel racetrack. That didn't go well. That for me was, we could wheel out all the old favourites, couldn't we? We could wheel out the Lavaggi, we could wheel out all sorts of things. I sort of miss those days when someone completely off their trolley would turn up with something completely different. We've seen it in all sorts of ways and with various levels of seriousness. I remember a hybrid version of the Gumpert Apollo with Heinz-Harald Frentzen racing at the Nürburgring 24 Hours not that long ago. Jim Glickenhaus with some beautiful, beautiful cars, but every year he seemed to turn the wick up and make it more complicated for himself, hybridizing, the Ferrari-based GT racer, for instance. But that went reasonably well. They had a bit of a fire, though, I think, in year 2 for that car. But there are so many. And I keep promising myself I will revisit a series on Daily Sports Car, the Sports Cars That Never Race series that we started, but I'm afraid life overtook me in the last 12 months. But it still sits there with work underway. It's a great question. There's so many, so many, but there seem to be rather fewer now, MP, than perhaps we had in years gone by.
And where shall we go next amongst the fun?
I'm going to go with Nick Blackow.
Blackow.
I think because he sounds like it should be one of those kind of smash hit things on Batman. Blackow.
Well, it's also the name of a street, just almost within walking distance of where we live. Yes, Blackow. Yes.
Wow, is there another one called Thwack?
And Booth. No, wait a minute. That was
Nick has actually asked, and I think not for the first time, totally understands, for the honour of MP destroying your surname. Sorry, it's me that's done it this time. Sports car drivers as biscuits and cookies and even cake. Come on, then.
You're going to have to take the lead on this. You're the one with the creative juices left.
Flunny what?
Okay. Well, you already mentioned one. I was going to say Heinz-Harald Frentzen. I'm not sure if that would work. Let's see. Wow, I am so disappointed at how badly I am face planting on this one. Normally, this is the kind of thing I'd live for.
Black Forest Barber?
Yeah, that would be Oh my God!
Grand Am champion, wasn't he? Wasn't Forrest a Grand Am champion back in the day?
Absolutely.
The Kodak car, if I remember rightly, the actually remarkably attractive Doran car. There's going to be more, aren't they? We'll revisit this one.
Not only will we revisit it, but we need to kick this out and say we need your help in coming up with names for sports car drivers. This is one for Twitter.
This is one for Twitter.
Yes.
Tweet us with #Twisk, and it's sports car teams, cars, drivers, which feature, baked confectionery at some point. However you can crowbar that name in.
Yes, and we will gather those. Again, please use the #Twisk, TWISC, and we will grab all those and incorporate those into next week's show. Oh, Lord. Okay.
Oh, here's one that the readers can help us with as well. Jonathan Schultz asked, what was the worst concept for a sports car series doomed to fail and therefore did? His guess would be the FI GT2 European Championship. That's not, by the way, FI GT2 in its current iteration. It was some years ago as the transition came from GT2, and it did indeed fall flat in its arse. And I think it was Spa 24 Hours was the only round that year in that championship. I'm going to put that one out there. What was the worst? I'm trying to recall, and have been trying to recall for a little wee while, the name of the series that never got off the ground, which were kind of sort of, oddly enough, a little bit kind of hypercar styled, badly. Open top prototypes, and I've got a feeling dams were involved in this. This would have been late 90s, maybe a little earlier, but never got off the ground. I seem to recall there being something there. There's plenty of them, surely. What do you come up with?
I mean, part of me wants to say Grand Am, but obviously they did win the war, so I would say it ticks the box for worst concept. But it wasn't doomed to fail because obviously it ended up surviving as the American Le Mans Series was starting to run out of financial steam. I guess I'm struggling here as well. You ticking all the boxes of worst concept that was doomed to fail and therefore did. Good Lord! I mean. If I think it's a little bit of an abstract take on it, but if we think back to the 1990s in North American sports car racing, IMSA changed hands so many times, changed names. Same with, there was SCCA version / Daytona Beach versions of series competing as well. USRRC and professional sports car racing, and there were, I'm not saying bad concepts so much, but the general mind frame of, hey, we're going to keep passing around IMSA like it's just, everybody gets to own it at some point and infuse some sort of dumb vision for what it should be, and then apply a dumb name on top of it as well. And no, we're going to create a rival, and we're going to... I would say that general period, though, of just 1,000 different names, nobody really knew what was what. We had the FIA GT series, which also came over here and raced.
Indeed.
And seemed to cause even further confusion as to how many series were ongoing. I would say, again, maybe it doesn't tick every box, Jonathan, but that comes to mind as well. But please, this one too, send us your thoughts on this using the good old #Twisk so we can find them on the tweeters. Shall we wind down here with, where do you think?
Well, there's a quick one, because oddly enough, it turns that point on its head from a good friend from the Reddit group, Flubman11. I'm afraid he's challenged me on what I've said in my note they're asking for questions. What is becoming the must-listen podcast for fans and followers of endurance racing?
What?
Well, it is. That's what I said.
Okay.
He's basically is offering a kind of veiled opinion that in some way we've undermined his efforts with his own endurance chat show. I think we're just going to have to come to an agreement that Marshall and I are just more eye-candy than you are, Flubman.
I mean, the harassment I deal with just walking out the door every day, it's very unbecoming. Very, very unbecoming.
But he does ask a really good question here. He asks, how do you gain an expanding audience for content on Racer, DSC, for the Marshall Pruett podcast? He says that trying to advertise and market his own projects hasn't yielded the attention it's been after, so some tips would be great. I think the answer here is adapt. Find out what people like. I generally tend to kind of flip through Twitter on a kind of pretty constant basis throughout the day. It's what I use to get out a lot of news. And some of the efforts I see from some people, it's either not engaging at all, or if you've actually got to put something in that says, "What do you think?" ? My view is that's a real cop-out. Start engaging with people on a human level, I think, is the answer. I'm not aiming this at you, Flubman, at all, but start talking to people in ways which you would talk to people. Start to use electronic media as if it's a human interaction rather than an algorithm. And I think actually that does pay off. It doesn't appeal to everybody. It might not get you the very big numbers that some people claim. And I wouldn't, the thought that in any way what we do would be categorized in that appalling word, the word which I think will appall me to the day I am carried out of here in a box, the internet influencer.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in numbers that mean nothing. I'm interested in people who are engaged with what we do and what we say and how we work. I'm not interested in 450,000 people baying on the internet and putting in just the kind of level of discontent and lack of discussion. I'm interested in what we've got, which is, a number of people who actually do care about the subject matter we're talking about. That's what I'd suggest here is put the emotion in, reel it down to the point where you might imagine you're having the kind of conversation that you and I have had, young sir, at a bar in Bathurst. That kind of level. Have fun with it. Don't make anybody a victim of that conversation. Embrace difference with it, and I think you'll find there are some surprises to come. And carry on what you're doing with that Reddit group. It's a friendly place to be. Not everyone on the internet can actually say that that's the case. I think it's to be prized that actually what you've got there is a rapidly growing group of people that truly do love the sport, and the negativity is sort of kept in stay, and I like that about it. That's why I tend to kind of read what you guys are talking about and interact with it.
And I'll throw in a couple things. You tend to get two methods or models of where folks are going to, I believe, want to participate and follow in what you're doing. You're either bringing something unique that nobody else is offering or very few are offering, or you do whatever it is that you do in a way that folks find enjoyable, possibly more enjoyable than others. If you think about all of the sports car racing websites and or racing websites that really make an effort to cover sports car racing, not all of them do, but if you think of the places you go on a daily basis to catch up on your sports car information, more often than not, you're going to come across half the content is the same. It's the same story. Team X announces they're doing something. Driver Y says they're going to retire or do change, whatever. You're going to find a lot of commonality because that's just reality. But you also probably in that quest each morning or during your lunch break, whatever, find out that, hey, I like this person's writing style, the podcast, whatever version that this site does compared to that site. There's something about it that I prefer. So, it comes down to preference. I've said probably a number of times, growing up, especially really diving in hard to Formula One in the 1980s, it was a absolute rite of passage each week to head down to Tower Books and Records in San Mateo, California, and get the latest issue of Auto Sport, because I would dive straight to the fifth column written by one of my heroes, Nigel Roebuck. And what was Nigel talking about? Formula One. A little bit of history was always peppered in, but Formula One. And I could have, and did, admittedly, read the F1 content written in On Track and Road and Track and other magazines as well, many of them talking about the same Grand Prix that just took place. But it was Nigel's phrasing, words, experience, humanity, whatever, that just spoke to me and made me an absolute fan of his. So just in a very basic way, I would say you're in a space that has people that are already there. If there's something truly unique you can offer, an angle, an approach, great. And if not, maybe just look for or think about the ways you can do what you're doing that maybe others would tend to prefer your take over mine or Graham's or others. That's natural and expected. I am not my own favorite writer. I have, others, even on the series that I report on, where I go, all right, I love that guy. I'm going to read what he wrote just for the sake of joy. And so I'd say that's only normal. Keep in mind, Graham and I have been doing this for a while. So we do have a fair amount of contacts. We can bring in a lot of folks to amplify what we do for our written content or otherwise. So, that's always going to be an advantage. But just don't let any of that stuff deter you. Keep doing whatever it is that you enjoy in this space, and just think about ways you can either be unique or just stand out in some way that hopefully folks will enjoy. We'll also mention here, and I realize it's very late and we're almost ready to say goodbye on this overtime week in sports cars, but here today on Wednesday, November the 7th at 12:02 p.m. California, 8:02 p.m. UK for Graham, we are at a total, since I launched this podcast in May of 2016, we are at 1,995,757 total downloads, which means that we are, as soon as brother, Joe Rogan's podcast or Mark Maron's podcast will do that in about a day and a half. So
don't care. We know where our market is. That's impressive stuff, Marshall.
Well, thanks to you and thanks to everybody. But we're, by the time this goes up shortly, we're going to tick over the 2 million download number, which again, I know, our friends at Radio Le Mans with their live listening and their again, we are dwarfed by some others, but I also know that we're doing okay on our own. So that's just a little mention here, a little sneak preview. I've had my pal Roger Warwick do a little celebratory thing to thank folks that, in his usual style, is pretty funny. But yeah, this is just something through dedication, Monsieur Floodman 11, that I love doing this. We love doing this, and we are not the best. We are not the most anything, but we love what we do. We have built a following from it. We have seen that it is growing, and continues to grow, and so we're just going to stay committed to it and keep doing our week in sports cars, IndyCar, and the other things too, because we love it. And I have a feeling the questions you've asked here are all centered on the same thing. You love it, you want to do it, and you hope it will grow. So yeah, just keep fighting, man. Keep fighting. That's the only thing I can recommend. And I'm fairly confident that if you are determined to outlast any doubts or negativity, that you're going to get to a place that you're pretty happy with. The second question you asked was, around this time of year, I suffer some pretty intense sports car burnout. Do you guys experience burnout in the same way? And if so, how do you go about alleviating it or recharging? You can't see this. It's many thousands of miles away, but my hand is currently raised, Graham. Yes, absolutely suffer. I would not say it is limited for me to sports cars. Graham covers sports cars exclusively. I do open wheel and sports cars, so knowing that my calendar tends to be very packed with both forms of racing. Yeah, I'll tell you, by usually heading into May, which is month of May Indy 500, that is where I need to take an intentional mindset break and say, okay, this is about to get really intense. This past May, Graham, we had things started out at the IMSA event at Mid-Ohio, and I then stayed because the following weekend was the Indianapolis Grand Prix on the road course, and then 2 days later, practice started for the Indy 500, and was there for almost an entire month. So, yeah, would just say that it's no different than anybody's job, though, I have to imagine, that, you're putting in long hours over and over again. The monotony is just a part of this. It's no different than any other job. The people that are working, turning wrenches, changing tires on the timing stand everybody gets burned out, because everybody gets burned out for the most part in their job, even awesome ones in the world of motor racing.
Absolutely right. I mean, from my perspective, here we are now in the second week the first full week rather in November. By my reckoning, I've got at least 4 and probably 6 more long-haul intercontinental trips to make before the end of this year. And remember, this is actually a reasonably quiet year on that front with the WEC side of things. For me, I mean, your May, June, mate, is bonkers. But January and into February, where in the past it was relatively quiet, it's now absolutely bonkers with testing, with racing in Asia, with racing in the Middle East, with Daytona, with Bathurst. The coming year is pretty heavy. The year after that, when we get into the new calendar for the WEC, is utterly insane. And, at that point, you are looking at the potential of, just either not coming home for 2 months, and I'm not kidding, or you're looking at having to have groups of 2 or 3, lots of groups of people covering the major sports car races. And it's at that point that you've got to make some pretty hard choices as to where you put your A team, if you like. And, for me, yes, it's tiring. It doesn't get any easier as you get older, but there is no place I'd rather be. We work with some amazing people, with amazing action, at some amazing venues. But Marshall's right. The hours are absolutely, utterly bonkers. Mercifully, I've never in my life done a job that you could remotely say was 9 to 5. So the culture shock of that was not too bad. But if you are in a job that is sort of that, 8:30 to 5:30 or whatever, and you have aspirations of coming to do something like this professionally, come and have a look what it's like first, because I'm telling you, there's a couple of shockers there. We do love what we do. I wouldn't do this otherwise, to be absolutely honest with you. But there are days when I come in from an airport, sit on the couch, and I'm not seen again for another day and a half. It is exhausting stuff. But we keep on punching.
And
next up,
there's also a quick addition to your final quote or final question here of how do you go about alleviating it or recharging?
Family, mate. Family.
Well, yeah. And so I'll just say this because it's a very true example. There's one or more people if we're talking specifically the sports car side of things, who spends 365 days a year staying on top of every little thing that develops everywhere, who is the 7th driver at this regional whatever endurance series for this event in Czechoslovakia. That's great. If that's what you want to do, then do that. And purely by choice, it also throws your work-life balance completely out of balance. And so, since sports car racing, if you're a fan, if you're a reporter, if you're really burrowed deep into it, it's not like NASCAR, where NASCAR is what it is. It's one thing. It's a regional series. Might have a lot of cars, a lot of drivers, but you can just focus in on that one thing. Sports car racing tends to be an international gaze that must be cast to stay on top, to understand all the rules, regulations, moves, points, races, blah, blah, blah. It can get to be, it is, I think, by far the most intense. And so, with that said, the best thing you can do, unless you want to just be a robot that does nothing other than follow sports cars or cover sports cars, is just as what Graham mentioned about family. Provided you have family, not everybody does, being the person who says, life will go on if I don't look at what's happening in the world of sports car racing for a weekend, even if there's races happening, or a couple of, I'm going to put it aside. Having that mental break, spending time with a loved one, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, whatever. If you're single, honestly, going to see movies, going to a park, just a break, whatever it is, a clean break where you're not constantly lighting up your phone trying to see who's leading the whatever class at the 24 hours of such and such. So I would just say that might be the commitment to make.
Yeah, I mean, and do different things. I think that's the other thing, is it can be all-consuming. There have been occasions when it has been. And it is good, yes, to have a routine away from it, but also just to do different things. And oddly enough, doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up the motorsport bug. I did something last weekend which I've never done before, never ever done before, and it ended with a motorsport event at a facility which was closing. It was its final meeting, and the final event was won overall by a Lincoln Town Car stretch limousine. It was a demolition derby at the end of a all-day banger racing event at the fabulous Arena Essex with a group of good mates. Johnny Palmer, my partner in crime of the European Le Mans Series TV, Stephen Kilby and his lovely mum and dad, Peter Pedro May, DSC's Ace Snapper, and his mum were there, and we just had a great day doing not a lot other than laughing our heads off at this spectacular array of battered cars getting more battered as the day went on. It is a matter of just remembering, you're right, MP, the world will not stop if you're not at that event. And actually, sometimes it's important that you're not.
I'll also suggest that you become a better, more interesting, more well-rounded human being if you do not fixate on racing every single day of the year. Just a suggestion as someone who's maybe seeing the ill effects of that. All right, we are definitely well into overtime. We are going to have to pick just a couple of final ones from about 10 of the fun. Why don't I go with... Let's start off with Rob Horn, who says, with the Spice Girls announcing a reunion, which sports car team or set of drivers would you like to see a reunion of? He says, mine would be the Audi Le Mans team, just one more race. Graham Goodwin, who would your sports car reunion team or driver be based around?
The Audi boys is a really good call. They're always great fun, massively professional, but always great fun to be around. But if I'm forced at gunpoint to avoid that as the answer, and it's the obvious one, in terms of those crews that I've actually had experience of working alongside and with, then actually the Virgo Motorsport that begat JMW Motorsport, Rob Bell and Gian Marino Bruni. That was a fantastic pairing from a distance, couldn't tell them apart. But it was, by every measure, that's a pairing that should never work, but it did beautifully. And I would add into that, by the way, their super sub during those years was the late and very great Alan Simonson. And Simo is another one that I would put back there. I'd have him back any time, any car, any place. But it's those, they're the guys that you can go and ask the question, a question however detailed you like, and they'll give you an intelligent answer, but you can have fun with as well, because it's a sport and it should ultimately be fun.
You are starting to get the sound of an alien, so I would suggest disconnecting and reconnecting your headset. I'll add Rob, the mid-2000s Aston Martin DBR9 program that competed both here in the American Le Mans Series, but also at Le Mans through, 2009 or so, 8, 9, 10. Especially at Le Mans, there were some real characters, real quality, but also some real characters in that factory AMR effort. So I'd love to see them get back together. All right, let's go with two more. I'm going to go with Kite Velocity here. Says, as a fledgling sports car enthusiast, I'm listening back to old Marshall Pruett podcasts. So, Graham Goodwin, hashtag, who the hell are you? Is there an episode in the making? Cheers from Lars. So last year, I did Series 1 or Season 1 or whatever you want to call it of Who the Hell Are You? And it was 50 rapid-fire questions to a variety of interesting folks, mostly drivers, some in the media. There's some definitely funny, couple insightful, deep questions, also a couple naughty questions as well. Folks seem to enjoy it. And somewhat quietly, somewhat privately, I have actually captured Season 2. There is not a Graham Goodwin episode, though, so maybe when we see each other in January at Daytona, maybe we can do a extra special one. But, heck, you asked, so I'll mention it here, and I've been, honestly, I finished recording these
Who you got 2
months ago, maybe, and haven't told anyone about it. I still have to produce all of them, so I've got work to do here. I've got 21 episodes of Season 2 of Who the Hell Are You in the can. So here's the roster. Bo Barfield, Connor Daly, Dario Franchitti, Declan Brennan, Earl Bamber, Graham Rahal, Elio Castroneves, James Hinchcliffe, Jan Magnussen, Joseph Newgarden, Michael Shank, Nick Tandy, Oliver Gavin, Paul Tracy, Richard Westbrook, Ricky Taylor, Robin Miller, Ryan Briscoe, Simon Pagenaud, Will Power, and the 21st and final, Mr. Two Questions himself, Wolfgang Monser.
Who else is there? Who else is there?
Well, there's Graham Goodwin, but yeah, am I
the mystery episode that will never be seen the light of day?
Oh yeah, that's a whole subgenre itself. Yeah, so, and I think season 2 is probably going to be it, because it's not as if there aren't other drivers left for me to speak with, but it's not just a case of who can I grab, it's who would be interesting or a blast to pose these questions to. So not every driver, although they might be awesome in whichever ways, are necessarily perfect fit for the Who the Hell Are You format. But yeah, I've got 21 episodes I need to get cranking on here shortly, so that should be fun. And yeah, maybe we can make a super somewhat late 22nd with good old Graham Goodwin next year. Of the remaining questions after Lars, whose do you think we should choose as the final?
I think the final one should come to... There's another... If you can mangle Chris's name, go for it.
Chris Alfby. Chris Applebee's. See?
Chris.
He's the owner of a big restaurant chain in North America. I'm sorry, Chris. The letters in your last name are perfect. Unfortunately, my brain does not process them with goodness. Words, frame, mind, work, bad. Chris says, do you think we could see the return of, well, Salute, Siloute, I believe that is meant to be silhouette cars anytime soon, next 10 years? And if so, what 3 cars would you like to see? Well, Chris, one of the cool things here, and it's been coming up more and more on the Weekend Sports Cars, I have a feeling, Graham, with the odd turn of the Blank Stare World Challenge GT presented by Pirelli Payne going in a kind of a non-fan, just customer looking after the paddock and the manufacturers, but not really trying to be an entertainment product route here. We've been talking more and more about the revived, resuscitated, restoring Trans Am series. And it was once, if not twice, an absolute raging success in North America. It has fallen out of that category around the mid-2000s, and it has definitely picked up. It is owned by Tony Perella, the person who also owns the SVRA Vintage series that is extremely popular as well here in North America. And with Tony's involvement and the involvement of many others, this Trans Am series, Chris, using silhouette cars, also using some production-based cars too, but in the very top classes, those silhouette cars, tube frame cars, traditional Trans Am cars of the late 70s, all throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s, they're still here. They're still brutal. They're still 800 horsepower, crazy looks, crazy everything. Imagine the feeling of a Corvette C7R going by, just the raw sound and ferocity, and then imagine that sensation, but applied to, I think it's the T1, TA1, TA2, I forget exactly how they do their upper class designations, Graham, but that is the entire field at the upper level in Trans Am, and it's amazing. I do believe, and having heard from a friend who went to the Trans Am race last weekend at COTA, who had also been to many of the IMSA and or WEC races at COTA, that there was a real crowd. I'm not saying crazy crowd, but there was a real turnout there for Trans Am, plus the SVRA vintage angle as well. I think there might be something there, Graham. Just domestically, I realize this isn't, Chris's question isn't limited to North America, but at least for what we have here, Trans Am is still going. It is growing. And if you just look at the product, knowing that World Challenge has its touring car classes, has GT4, GT3 as the top, some of those classes, types, many of those cars, TCR included, TCR, GT4, and GT3 can all be found in IMSA. Then you say that's not truly a unique thing being offered. If we're just looking for what might attract folks, I could see a thing in the coming years where if there's more promotion, more investment made in Trans Am, maybe a wider presence on television here in North America, maybe live streaming reaching more folks, I could see a place where this silhouette series, mostly silhouette series, really slots into a number 2 spot right behind IMSA.
Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, from a European perspective, a more global perspective, if you like, I guess you could argue that car sort of begins to fill that kind of role in kind of top level sports cars. I'd add this as a bit of a fun aside, by the way. We'll have a piece from the marvelous RJ O'Connell, US-based reporter for Daily Sports Car and Super GT World on Super GT, about the final race of its racing life of the beloved mid-engined, screaming hybridized Toyota Prius in GT300, the ultimate silhouette racer, if you ask me, which will come at the end of this season. And that plays to me to actually where I kind of see silhouettes, which goes back a little wee while and back into my early years, and a thing in the UK we had called the Wendy Wool Special Saloon Championship. Are you familiar with this one?
Yes.
This was basically just as bland and as beige a kind of base idea about a car that you can imagine, but underneath it a rorty, throaty, proper piece of single-seater engineering. So you would have VW Beetles based on a Formula 5000 car, for instance, and lots more besides.
Hillman Imps and other little wacky...
Reliant Kittens.
Yes.
I mean, fabulous, fabulous stuff. And, when you think back and think about Group C and Group B rally cars, for me, that's another of those iconic micro areas, if you like, that we've sort of lost, and I'd like to see that back. I'd like to see something that brought that kind of concept back into a more national scale of club racing. Whether or not that's gone forever, I sort of hope it hasn't. There are still places where you can see that idea still around, but I know there was an event a couple of years ago which reunited some of those old cars, and it had just a massive reaction from a fan base. If someone could come up with something that wasn't too vanilla, that wasn't too spec, and bring that kind of thing back, I think you might find a few surprises at a club level with that.
Well, should we say goodbye? How shall we say goodbye?
Well, for starters, I'll accept the cue this time of saying goodbye. I think the first thing I'm going to say is this, MP. You mentioned the numbers. And that we will pass 2 million for the combined total. I want to say this. Thank you for the efforts you put in to launching the Marshall Pruett podcast to start with. Thank you for actually not making it vanilla. Thank you for breaking the mold. The in-car stuff is just off the clock. The different formats you brought to it, I know has been what the fan base has been attracted to, and particularly cornering the market with the IndyCar side of things, and growing the family of enthusiasts that we've actually got now for the weekend sports cars. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this one, because it is a massive highlight of my week.
Well, that's too kind of you. And yeah, obvious statement alert. Thanks to everyone who listens. Thanks to everyone who sends in questions. Thank you to everyone who says, hey, check these guys out. They're silly or stupid. Or, well, I'm the silly and stupid one. Graham's the smart guy.
No.
Me not that's smart in my head.
That's movie. My children.
But that's okay. But yeah, thank you. Again, the show don't listen to itself. This is something where truly, purely 100%. There are some things where You say this thing's just going and it's raging success by itself, and, they don't make any real effort to embrace folks because they figure it's so popular, it's just self-sustaining. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, but I also don't think we're ever going to be at a place, Graham, where we stop being incredibly thankful every time we record and every time we post, because folks tend to say, hey, we listened to it, we enjoyed it, and keep doing more of it. So as long as that's the case, we are going to keep doing it, and hopefully, now, on to the next 2 million. And we'll try and keep stacking more and more as we're hoping that this little Marshall Pruett podcast and our Week in Sports Cars, Week in IndyCar, and so on, hopefully these things continue to grow and become ever-evolving goodness. Well, my friend, go have dessert. Go, I don't know what. What do you do when we're done? Because it's usually late morning, early afternoon my time, but it's always evening. It's always the sun's always down for you. What's a post-show decompression activity for you? I've never asked.
Well,
because I don't care. I'm a bad friend.
That's okay. I will likely be going to make sure my daughter is actually in bed where she should be. And after that, I'll be doing, as you quite rightly said, a little bit of decompression. I'm a very late adopter, by the way, to Netflix. Boy, am I enjoying that. Really enjoying getting stuck into a completely different way of consuming the televisual treat. So working my way through that. But what I'm trying to do at the moment is use my days wisely and pushing forward journalistically and commercially. And my evenings, I'm trying to remember that I'm in my mid-50s and do need to set my ass down for an hour or two on an evening. But a chat like this and with the people listening into us is not a chore. Love it, love it, love it. And can't wait till next week when hopefully we'll be able to get the Week in Sports Cars in before I get on the big Silver Bird again and head for Shanghai for back-to-back FIWC and AsLMS series, which gets underway in just a couple of weeks' time.
And that is a perfect way to say farewell and thank you again to listening to the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires and...
me.
Yes, you got it.